The night Margaret Calloway decided to destroy my life, she was wearing pearls. Not the small, delicate kind that women wear to Sunday service. These were the large, deliberate kind. The kind that say, I have been important in this room for a very long time. And don't you forget it. She was standing at the center of the Military Family Support Gala she had spent 6 months organizing, holding a champagne flute like it was a scepter, surrounded by the exact people she had spent 20 years carefully collecting city council members, hospital board directors, the kind of men whose names appeared on buildings. I was standing 8 feet away. She didn't look at me once. I had been home from the hospital for exactly 19 days. 19 days since I had pushed a human being into the world. 19 days since Margaret had walked into my hospital room, looked at my daughter for the first time, and said, not she's beautiful, not congratulations, not even how are you feeling. She had looked at my daughter's face and said, she has the Calloway nose, thank God. I remember thinking, say something right now. I didn't. I smiled, because I had been smiling at Margaret Calloway for 4 years, and old habits are stubborn things. That was my last mistake. 8 feet away, Margaret was talking to a group that included a retired federal judge, the chief of staff of a major Richmond hospital, and a woman I recognized the moment she walked through the door. Brigadier General Patricia Owens, Deputy Commanding General of Fort Belvoir, the woman who had once told me in a sandstorm outside Kuwait City that I was the best JAG officer she had ever served alongside. Margaret did not know who Patricia Owens was. She was about to find out. I heard Margaret's voice carry across the room, the way it always did, loud enough to be heard, soft enough to seem accidental. She was telling the group about family challenges, about the difficulty of modern marriages, about how some women simply spread themselves too thin. Then she said it, with the particular head tilt she used when she wanted to seem sympathetic while saying something cruel. My daughter-in-law has always been a little overwhelmed. She's in the military, some desk position, I think. But between that and the new baby, well, some women just aren't cut out for both a career and a family. There's no shame in admitting your limits. The retired federal judge nodded slowly. The hospital chief of staff murmured something agreeable. And Brigadier General Patricia Owens set her champagne glass down on the nearest table with a sound so deliberate it cut through the string quartet. She turned to Margaret. I'm sorry. I don't think we've met. Margaret smiled her best smile, the donor smile. The one she'd been perfecting for 2 decades. Margaret Calloway. I organized this evening. I see, Owen said, looking at her for exactly 1 second. And the woman you're describing, your daughter-in-law, what did you say her name was? Sarah. Sarah Calloway. You do know what she does, right? Margaret laughed light, dismissive, the laugh of someone who has never once been wrong in a room and doesn't expect to start now. Oh, she's in the military, dear. Something administrative. I believe Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Calloway, Owen said, and her voice had shifted into something that didn't belong at a cocktail party, something that belonged in a briefing room with the door closed, is the JAG officer responsible for putting 3 colonels in federal prison. She prosecuted the largest military procurement fraud case in the last decade. I was her commanding officer in Kuwait. I watched her work 22 hours straight to make sure that men twice her rank who believed they were untouchable understood that no one is untouchable. The retired federal judge had gone very still. The hospital chief of staff was no longer nodding. Margaret's smile had not moved, but her eyes had changed. Something behind them was calculating very fast, running numbers, looking for an exit, finding none. I would choose, Owen said quietly, your next sentence about that woman very carefully. I stood 8 feet away and watched Margaret Calloway's 20-year reputation begin to crack along a seam she had built herself. I did not smile. I didn't need to. But to understand why that moment was the most satisfying of my adult life, I need to take you back. Back to 4 years ago, when I first sat across a dinner table from Margaret Calloway and made the worst mistake a prosecutor can make. I believed someone without checking the evidence. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Merritt, Judge Advocate General's Corps, United States Army. 18 years of service, 31 prosecuted cases, 0 acquittals. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because the central irony of everything that happened, the thing that kept me awake at 3 in the morning while my daughter slept in the next room, is that I am professionally trained to see through deception. I know what forged documents look like. I know what a coordinated false narrative sounds like. I know exactly how people construct lies that look like truth when you're standing too close. And I still didn't see it coming. Because Margaret Calloway was operating in the one jurisdiction where my training had absolutely no power. My own marriage. I met James at a veterans charity fundraiser in Richmond, Virginia, on a Tuesday evening in October. I was 37. I had just returned from a 14-month assignment overseas, and I had that particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from spending too long in a world where everything is high stakes and nothing is personal, and then suddenly standing in a hotel ballroom eating miniature crab cakes with no idea what to do with your hands. James was standing near the silent auction table, frowning at a framed landscape print he clearly had no intention of bidding on, but hadn't figured out how to walk away from. I walked over. "It's terrible," I said. He looked at me. "The painting. Objectively bad." He laughed genuinely, not politely, and we spent the rest of the evening arguing about whether bad art at charity auctions was a moral failure or a public service. He asked what I did. I told him. Military prosecutor, JAG Corps, Fort Belvoir. He didn't flinch. Didn't give me the slow blink people sometimes gave when they were recalibrating the look that meant, "Oh, so you're more serious than I expected." He just nodded and said, "That sounds like work that matters." I went home that night and thought, this one is different. I was right about that. I just didn't know different could come with complications I hadn't anticipated. We dated for 8 months before he introduced me to his family. I found out later he'd been delaying it, making excuses about schedules and distances, and Mom's been dealing with a lot. I should have asked more questions about what a lot meant. I didn't. The first dinner at the Calloway house was a Sunday in June. Margaret had cooked enough food for 12 people and set the table with cloth napkins that had been ironed. I noticed the ironed napkins immediately. In my experience, ironed napkins at a casual family dinner mean one of two things. Either this family has staff, or someone is performing. Margaret didn't have staff. She hugged me at the door. Both arms. The full embrace, not the half hug of polite strangers. She held my hands afterward and looked at my face and said, "James has told us so much about you. We're so glad you're here." She smelled like gardenia perfume and seemed genuinely warm. I thought, well, this is going to be fine. We sat down to dinner. James's father, Robert, was a retired real estate attorney, quiet, observant, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke and seemed to be running a constant internal calculation about everything around him. James's younger brother Carter was 28, worked in property management, and spent most of dinner on his phone. Margaret ran the conversation like a deposition. She asked about my background, my education, my family. I told her about growing up in North Carolina, about losing my mother to cancer when I was 29, about deciding to go into law and then choosing the military, because I wanted the law to mean something immediate, something that affected people in real time. Margaret nodded as if this was charming. Then she said, "And you don't find it lonely, being in such a male environment? All that time away from, well, normal life?" I smiled. "I find it purposeful," I said. She smiled back. "Of course you do," she said. The conversation moved on. James squeezed my hand under the table. The food was genuinely good. I told myself that one slightly odd comment was nothing. People said slightly odd things. It didn't mean anything. It meant everything. I just hadn't learned how to read Margaret Calloway yet. Over the next 2 years, I developed what I can only describe as a field manual for surviving dinners at the Calloway house. Rule 1. Don't talk about work in specifics. Not because James's family wasn't interested, but because Margaret was too interested, in the way that people are interested in something they're building a case against. Every time I mentioned a case, she would tilt her head and say something like, "It must be so hard to be around that kind of negativity, all that conflict. Don't you want to come home to something peaceful?" The implication was always the same. What I did was not quite a real life. A real life looked like Margaret's life. Dinner parties, garden club, the hospital charity board she'd chaired for 9 years. Rule 2. Don't react to the comments about age. I was 37 when I met James. He was 33, 4 years. Margaret mentioned this differential with remarkable frequency for someone who claimed it didn't matter. Of course, Sarah's had more time to establish herself. It's wonderful that James isn't intimidated by a more experienced woman. Once, at a birthday dinner, she said in front of 6 people, "Sarah, you must be relieved. James doesn't care about that sort of thing." "A lot of men would," James said. "Mom," she waved a hand. "I'm just saying, I had heard her say I'm just saying 40, 1 times in 2 years. I know because I counted. Old prosecution habit. You start logging things before you know you'll need them. Rule 3, and this was the most important one. Never let Margaret see that her comments landed. Because I understood, even then, what she was doing. Margaret Calloway had a very specific theory about the world, organized around a central principle. The Calloway family was exceptional, and anything that threatened its exceptional status was a problem to be managed. I was a problem. Not because she disliked me personally. I don't think personal feelings entered into it at all. I was a problem because I had walked into her son's life and rearranged the furniture, and she had not been consulted. That was the unforgivable part, not me. The lack of consultation. We got married in September. Small ceremony, Fort Belvoir Chapel, 20 people. Margaret wore a beige dress she hadn't chosen originally. James told me she'd had a headache and changed at the last minute. I didn't ask what had happened to the dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. Some questions, I had learned, led to answers I wasn't ready to sit with. 14 months later, I was pregnant. I was 41 years old, and I had spent the better part of a decade being told by well-meaning people that the window was closing, that the timing was difficult, that maybe I should have considered this earlier. So, when the test came back positive on a Thursday morning in March, I sat on the bathroom floor for a full 5 minutes without moving, just breathing, counting the fact of it. James cried when I told him. Actual tears, the surprised kind, the kind that come before your face has time to arrange itself. I called my best friend, Major Denise Carter, who had been my roommate at JAG school, and who responded by immediately booking a flight from Fort Hood. I called my aunt in Raleigh, the only family I had left. I felt, for the first time in a long time, like something was beginning. I told James to call his family. He reported back that evening. "Mom's excited," he said, in the voice he used when he wanted something to be true. "James, what did she actually say?" He was quiet for a moment. "She said she hoped the baby would be healthy. And?" Another pause. "She asked whether you were planning to take maternity leave or whether you'd be back at work right away. She said she just wanted to plan ahead." I looked at him. "She wants to plan ahead," I repeated. "That's just how Mom is." I nodded. I did not say what I was thinking, which was, "Your mother has not asked how I'm feeling. She has not said congratulations. She has already begun calculating custody of a child who is currently the size of a lemon." I didn't say it. I went to bed and lay in the dark and told myself I was reading too much into things. I was not reading too much into things. The drumbeat of comments began approximately 48 hours after the pregnancy was announced and did not stop. At Easter dinner, 6 weeks in, "You'll want to think about how you're going to handle your situation once the baby comes. James can't be expected to manage everything on his own while you're at work." My situation as if a pregnancy were a logistical inconvenience I had created unilaterally. At a 4th of July cookout, I've been talking to some of the girls at the garden club about babysitting schedules. We think it would be better if the baby stayed closer to family during the week. I mean with your hours. She had been making childcare arrangements. For a child not yet born. Without speaking to me. When I mentioned this to James that night, he said, "She's just trying to help." I said, "She's trying to make decisions. Those are different things." He said, "You know how Mom is." That sentence. You know how Mom is. I had heard it 43 times in 4 years. What I knew was this. Every time James said those words, it was a small transfer of responsibility from his mother, who had done something, to me, who was supposed to absorb it. And every time I absorbed it, the ceiling on what Margaret could do rose by exactly 1 increment. I had been raising that ceiling for 4 years without understanding what I was building. Then came the baby shower. I didn't know there was going to be one until my colleague, Captain Rivera, the sharpest legal mind in my department, and a woman who could smell organizational dysfunction from 3 floors away, stopped by my office on a Wednesday afternoon and said, "Hey ma'am, are you excited for Saturday?" I looked up from my files. What's Saturday? Rivera's face did the thing it did in depositions when a witness said something that changed the shape of the room. The baby shower. At the Halloway Event Center. Margaret Calloway RSVP'd about 30 people. I set down my pen. "You didn't know," Rivera said. It was not a question. I called James from my car at lunch. "Tell me about Saturday." There was a silence that lasted slightly too long. "Mom wanted it to be a surprise. She thought you'd like James." My voice was calm. 18 years of military courtrooms had calibrated it. That way, the higher the stakes, the quieter I became. Your mother has organized a party for my pregnancy at a venue I did not choose, on a date I did not select, inviting people she chose. And no one thought to ask me whether I wanted this. She was trying to do something nice. Then she should have asked me if it would be nice. Those are different things. He said he'd talk to her. He didn't, or if he did, it had no detectable effect. Because on Saturday morning I walked into the Holloway Event Center and found pink balloons, white tablecloths, 34 guests, and Margaret Calloway standing at the head of the room like a host at her own dinner party. Which, I realized immediately, was exactly what it was. She had hired a florist. She had designed a custom menu. She had created a slideshow of Calloway family photos, going back 3 generations, with a section at the end titled The Next Generation that featured a professionally rendered image of a nursery decorated in Calloway family colors. There were no photos of my family in the slideshow. My mother was not in that slideshow. My aunt was not in that slideshow. The grandmother this baby would never meet. The woman who used to say that the only thing worth building in this life was something you'd be proud to leave behind was nowhere in that room except in my chest, which had gone very tight and very quiet. Margaret stood to speak. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about the Calloway family legacy. She talked about what it meant to bring a new generation into a family with such strong roots. Then she said, "And of course, we're all so grateful that James found someone, even if it took a little longer than expected." Soft laughter from the room who could give the family what it needed. What it needed. Not what we needed. Not what James and Sarah needed. What the family needed. I was 28 weeks pregnant, sitting in a chair with a paper plate of finger sandwiches, and I had just been described as a vessel for the continuation of someone else's bloodline. I looked at James. He was looking at the table. Then Margaret turned to the room and said, "I want to introduce James's wife. She's in the military, some kind of desk position, I think. We're all very glad she's taking some time to focus on what really matters." 34 people looked at me. I smiled. The interrogation room smile flat water. Nothing visible on the surface. Everything moving underneath. "Thank you, Margaret," I said. "That's very thoughtful." She beamed. A woman named Barbara, Margaret's oldest friend, touched my arm near the gift table as the party was ending. She leaned close and said quietly, "Honey, Margaret means well. She just doesn't always understand that there's a difference between supporting someone and replacing them." I looked at her. "Barbara," I said, "I've prosecuted people for exactly that distinction. You'd be surprised how rarely they understand it either." She stared at me for a moment. Then she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. "Good Lord," she said. "You're going to be fine." I hoped she was right. 3 weeks later, I wasn't sure. Nora arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, 3 weeks ahead of schedule, and entirely on her own terms. I was at my desk at Fort Belvoir when my water broke, not dramatically, just a quiet certainty that something had changed, the way evidence sometimes presents itself. Not with a crash, but with a shift in the air that tells you the room has reorganized around a new fact. I drove myself to Walter Reed. I called James from the parking lot. He arrived 40 minutes later and held my hand through 8 hours of labor with a steadiness that reminded me of why I had married him. Nora was born at 11:47 p.m. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, dark hair, a frown of profound concentration, as if she had arrived with an agenda and was already revising it. The nurse laid her on my chest, and I felt a specific silence that follows something enormous, not the absence of sound, but the presence of a new kind of weight that had no precedent in my experience. I had cross-examined 4-star generals without feeling my hands shake. I was shaking now. "She's perfect," James said. She was. The next morning, Margaret came to the hospital. Alone. Robert stayed home. Carter stayed home. James's extended family sent exactly one text. "Congrats! Can't wait to meet her when things calm down." From a cousin I'd met twice. But Margaret came. She walked in at 10 a.m. wearing the pearls, full makeup, the kind of presentation that communicates that she had not spent the previous night in a hospital chair, which she hadn't, because she hadn't been invited and had come anyway. She looked at Nora. She did not look at me. "She has the Calloway nose," she said. Thank God. I was 19 hours post-delivery. I had not slept. I said, "Margaret, her name is Nora." "Of course," she said, sitting down uninvited in the chair beside the bed, her eyes still on the baby. The Calloway baby. I looked at James. He was looking at his phone. My nurse, Sergeant First Class Diana Reeves, who ran her maternity ward like a forward operating base, appeared in the doorway moments later. She assessed the situation with professional efficiency. Mrs. Calloway? Visiting hours for non-immediate family are 11 to 1 today. Can I get you a coffee in the waiting room? Margaret looked at me, then at Nora, then stood, straightened her pearls. I'll come back this afternoon, she said, and left. Reeves looked at me. You okay, ma'am? Sergeant? I said. I have never been more grateful for visiting hour policies in my life. We were home for 9 days when the cradle appeared. I came downstairs one morning to find a white wooden cradle sitting in the corner of our living room antique, carefully refinished, with a small silver plate on the headboard engraved with one word, Calloway. I had not bought it. James had not bought it. There was a note card on the mattress in Margaret's handwriting, the capital C, with the long, deliberate curl she always used, for when Nora visits. As if this were a someday alternate arrangement rather than a statement about a child who lived here, who had never spent a single night anywhere except this house and the hospital where she was born. I called James at work. Your mother left a cradle in our living room. A pause. Oh yeah, she mentioned she might drop something off? She has a key to our house? Aye, she's my mother. Sarah James, did you give your mother a key to our house without telling me? The pause was about 3 seconds too long. He told me he'd take it back. He told me he did take it back. 6 weeks later, I came home from a postpartum appointment to find that Margaret had let herself in while I was out and rearranged the contents of Nora's nursery. She had moved the crib to face a different wall. She had replaced the mobile I'd chosen, a simple wooden one with geometric shapes, with one that played Brahms' Lullaby and had tiny golden C's hanging from it. She had taken the photos off the dresser. Photos of my mother, my aunt, Denise and me at JAG graduation, and replaced them with framed Calloway family portraits going back to what appeared to be the 1940s. She left a note. Made some improvements. The room feels much more like home now. M. I stood in the doorway of my daughter's room for a long time. Then I went to the kitchen, got a notepad, and wrote down the date, the time, and a precise description of every single thing Margaret had changed. I logged 37 documented incidents before the big violation came. Old prosecution habit. You log the small violations because they establish the pattern, and the pattern is what you need when the large violation arrives. 4 months after Nora was born, I returned to work part-time. Margaret called me on my first day back. I just wanted to check in. James mentioned you're going back to work. Part-time, yes. The sound of careful restraint. And Nora? Nora is with James in the mornings and with our sitter in the afternoons. Your sitter. She said it the way a prosecutor might say your alibi. I told James I'd be happy to take Nora during the week. I'm right there. It would be so much easier. We appreciate that, Mark. I'm only trying to help. Nora should be with family. She is with family, I said. Her father. Silence. Well, Margaret said finally, I just hope you're not taking on too much. Post-pregnancy can be such a fragile time. Emotionally, I mean. Women in demanding careers sometimes don't realize how vulnerable they are. Fragile, vulnerable, emotionally. I had heard those words before, not directed at me, but in documentation. The kind of language that shows up in guardianship filings. I held the phone very still. I appreciate your concern, I said. I hung up and sat in the Fort Belvoir parking lot for 2 minutes. Processing. I thought, you're being paranoid. She's just difficult. This is just how she is. I went inside and got back to work. I should have trusted my instincts. I am a prosecutor. My instincts are my primary instrument. But I was still trying to save something. And you can't save something and protect yourself from it at the same time. The call came on a Thursday. Colonel Davidson's voice at 8 a.m. was a specific kind of wrong. I knew his cadence 3 years working under him. He was a man comfortable in uncomfortable conversations, who had delivered bad news to families without flinching. When I heard the particular flatness in his voice, I knew before he said a word that this was not a routine call. Calloway, I need you to come in. Sir, there's been a formal complaint against you. The drive to his office took 11 minutes. I spent them quiet, running possibilities, eliminating them, a case I'd prosecuted, a procedural challenge, an administrative dispute, 40 things it might be, sorted by probability. It was none of them. Davidson's office. The document on his desk, printed and paper-clipped. I sat. He slid it across. The header read, Formal request for medical evaluation. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Calloway, JAG Corps. Submitted by Margaret Ann Calloway, Richmond, Virginia. I read it once, linearly, taking in the shape before the detail. Then I went back to the beginning and read it again, slowly. Margaret had written, in 4 pages of careful, organized prose, that I was experiencing severe postpartum emotional instability that was affecting my ability to make sound judgments in my professional and personal life. She cited erratic behavior, aggressive communication patterns, and an inability to prioritize the welfare of my infant child over career ambitions. She expressed grave concern for Nora's well-being and requested that the Army conduct a formal medical evaluation of my fitness for duty. She had also, she noted in a final paragraph, filed a petition in Virginia Family Court requesting emergency temporary guardianship of Nora, on the grounds that I had voluntarily acknowledged my inability to provide stable care during a documented conversation with medical professionals. I had never had any such conversation. At the bottom was a signature I did not recognize, a notary stamp, and attached was a document that purported to be signed by me, my name, my handwriting, almost exactly. Almost. I set the document down on Davidson's desk, picked up his pen, wrote on the notepad, date, source, motive, method. Then I wrote one more word, forgery. Davidson was watching me. Calloway. Sir, what do you need? I looked up. A copy of everything in this file. JAG records to run the notary stamp. And I need to make one phone call. He nodded. Do it by the book. Colonel, I said, I am the book. I sat in my car in the parking lot and called James. He answered on the 3rd ring. I said, Your mother filed a formal complaint with my commanding officer. She told the Army, I'm mentally unstable. She filed for emergency guardianship of our daughter using a document with my forged signature. Silence. He stopped. What? I need you to go to her house. I need you to ask her directly what she has done, and I need you to tell me the truth when you call me back. Sarah James. Flat. Quiet. The voice I used when there was nothing left to argue. I have a forged document with my name on it sitting on my commanding officer's desk. That is a federal crime. Whatever your mother has told you, I need you to find out the truth in the next 2 hours. Because after that, I'm not handling this as a family matter. He called back in 90 minutes. His voice was the voice of a man standing in the wreckage of something he hadn't known was on fire. He had gone to Margaret's house and found, on her desktop computer open, because she hadn't expected him, a folder named Nora's Future. He read me what was inside. Nursery design plans? Not for our house, but for Margaret's. School enrollment research, private schools in the Richmond area, ranked by Margaret's handwritten notes. A list of pediatricians. A weekly schedule titled Nora's Care Routine. A draft letter to a family court explaining why Nora's maternal living environment was inadequate and the Calloway family home was a more stable and nurturing choice. My name appeared in that folder exactly 4 times. Each time I was referred to as the mother. Not by name, not as Nora's parent, the mother. Like a variable. Something that could be substituted out. James's voice cracked somewhere in the middle of reading it to me. When he finished, I said, How long do you think this has been in the works? He couldn't answer. Because he knew, and knowing it meant knowing what he had not done while it was happening. James, I need you to make a decision right now. You can stand next to your mother, or you can stand next to your wife and your daughter. That is the only choice on the table. A very long silence. Sarah, he said, I'm sorry. I know. No, I mean, another broken breath. I should have stopped this years ago. I know, but the time for should-haves is over. What do you do right now? He told me, and then I got out of my car and went back to work. Captain Rivera found the first thread 3 days later. I'd asked her to run the notary stamp on the forged document, a standard trace, the kind we did on every piece of documentary evidence we processed. She was back in my office in 4 hours. And she had the look she got when a case had cracked open wider than expected. Ma'am, the notary stamp belongs to a Lawrence Prentice. Retired. His license has been inactive for 2 years. How was it used? That's the thing. She set a folder on my desk. Prentice died 14 months ago. Someone has been using his information. We traced the stamp to 3 other documents filed in Virginia Family Court in the last 18 months. 3 other documents. all in cases involving contested guardianship, all connected to filings by a family law attorney named Thomas Welch. James had mentioned Welch 3 months earlier. In passing, Mom found a good family lawyer who understands our situation. I had filed it away, as I filed everything, not knowing then that I would need it. Find Welch, I said. Don't contact him, just find him. Rivera found him in 40 minutes. Thomas Welch, 58, family law practice in Richmond, 20 years of estate and custody work. Clean record, no disciplinary actions. He's clean, Rivera said. Which means either he's good at hiding things, or he doesn't know what he's part of, I said. She nodded slowly. That's what I think, ma'am. 2 days later, Welch called my office directly. He came in person, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking this. He was a careful-looking man, gray at the temples, hands flat on the table when he sat down, the posture of someone who had decided to stop maneuvering. Mrs. Calloway, I believe I have been used as an instrument in something I did not fully understand, and I would like to correct that. He told me Margaret had hired him 3 months before Nora was born to prepare contingency documentation in case I proved unable to meet the demands of new motherhood. He had been told and shown documentation supporting that I had voluntarily expressed to my medical team that I was concerned about my own capacity. He had been told the guardianship petition was a protective measure the family wanted ready. He had been given what appeared to be a signed statement from me. He had not called me to verify it. He hadn't realized he should have. When did you realize the statement was forged? When my paralegal ran your name and found your professional record, he said quietly. Lieutenant Colonel, JAG Corps, 31 prosecuted cases. He looked at me. I called Margaret immediately. She told me I was misunderstanding the situation. I told her I was withdrawing from the case. She told me I was making a mistake. He paused. That's when I called you. I looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Welch, I'm going to need a formal statement. Everything you just told me, in writing, with dates. I know. He slid a folder across the desk. He'd already prepared it. I also want to file a complaint against my own client. I'm aware of what that means. I'm doing it anyway. I looked at the folder, then at him. Mr. Welch, I said, you just became our first witness. There are moments in a prosecution when the full shape of a case becomes visible all at once. It's not dramatic when it happens. It's very quiet. Everything goes still and then slightly colder, the way a room feels when you open a window in winter. That moment came when Rivera brought me the consolidated timeline. Margaret had begun documenting her concerns about my fitness as a mother approximately 3 months into my pregnancy. She had made coordinated contact with the Calloway family physician to obtain a character assessment of my stress levels. The physician had complied, without understanding he was contributing to a legal filing. She had spoken with 2 members of the hospital charity board she chaired to establish that I had seemed erratic at events where I had said fewer than 40 words, none of them erratic. She had hired Welch, arranged the forged notary stamp, filed the complaint to Davidson, and she had twice emailed the chairwoman of the Regional Family Court's Dependency Review Committee, a social acquaintance about a sensitive family situation involving a veteran with documented instability. No direct request. Just the seed of a narrative, planted in the right soil, watered carefully. 7 months. She had been building this for 7 months. While I was buying a crib and arguing with James about pediatricians and convincing myself that Margaret was difficult but manageable, she had been constructing, brick by brick, a case for why I should not have my own daughter. I sat with the timeline for a long time. Then I wrote on my notepad, what does she actually want? Not Nora, specifically, not in a predatory way. She wanted a Calloway baby. She wanted the continuation of something she had decided she owned. She wanted to be the center of the next generation, the way she had been the center of this one. And I was the obstacle not because I was unfit, but because I was separate, independent, not subject to her management. She hadn't tried to harm me because she hated me. She had tried to destroy me because I was in the way. That was, somehow, worse. That night, I went home to find James giving Nora a bath, his voice making the specific nonsense sounds that parents make, Nora responding with the absolute delight that 5-month-olds bring to bath time. I stood in the hallway just listening. Then I went to the bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer, and took out the JAG insignia, the one I set down every night, the one I'd been wearing for 18 years. I thought about the email, the one James had drafted and never sent. that Rivera had found in the cloud backup James had given me access to a week earlier, in the first genuinely courageous thing he had done since all of this began. The email, addressed to Margaret, read, "Mom, you need to stop. Sarah is my wife. Nora is our daughter. What you are doing is wrong, and you know it is wrong. I am asking you one last time to stop." He had written it, revised it twice, saved it to drafts, never sent it. I had read it once and closed the browser tab, and sat with the weight of it for a very long time. The unsent email told me two things. 1. Somewhere inside James, there was a man who understood exactly what was happening. 2. That man had been unable to become the version of himself that sends the email. Some things you can forgive. Some things you can understand without forgiving. I put the JAG insignia in my uniform pocket. Tomorrow was the gala. I was done waiting. I want to be precise about what I felt walking into the Military Family Support Gala that Margaret Calloway had spent 6 months organizing. Not triumph. Not anticipation. The specific calm of someone who has finished preparing and is now simply ready. The way a courtroom feels when you've presented your last piece of evidence and you know the verdict is already written, you just have to wait for the room to catch up. I wore my dress uniform. I don't always wear it to civilian events. But I had thought carefully about what Margaret had built in that room, 2 decades of social capital, of being the most impressive person in every space she occupied, and I had decided that tonight I would not minimize what I was. Not for comfort, not for peace. I arrived at 7. James arrived separately, which we had agreed on. He looked tired in the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy for too long and have finally set it down, regardless of the crash. I saw Margaret immediately, champagne in hand. Navy blue dress, pearls exact and deliberate, standing at the center of the room she had built. She saw me. Her eyes processed the uniform, recalibrated, kept smiling. "Sarah, you came. I wouldn't have missed it," I said. I located Brigadier General Owens within 4 minutes. We had spoken 2 days earlier. She knew why I was here. She knew what I needed. Nothing scripted, nothing arranged. Just her presence and her honesty if the moment came. "Calloway," she said when I reached her. "General." She looked at me. "Ready?" "I've been ready for 7 months," I said. 40 minutes into the evening, I was standing near the east wall when I heard Margaret's voice carrying across a gap in the music, loud enough to perform for an audience, soft enough to claim was private. She was talking to a group that included retired federal Judge Hargrove, the hospital chief of staff, 2 city council members, and Brigadier General Owens. I walked toward the group, not quickly, not aggressively, the way I walked into a courtroom, direct and unhurried, with the knowledge that I had already done the work. I was 8 feet away when Margaret said it. My daughter-in-law has always been a little overwhelmed. She's in the military, some desk position, I think. But between that and the new baby, well, some women just aren't cut out for both a career and a family. There's no shame in admitting your limits. Judge Hargrove nodded. The hospital chief murmured agreement, and Brigadier General Patricia Owens set her champagne glass down on the nearest surface with a sound that was very small and very final. She turned to Margaret. "I'm sorry. I don't think we've met." Margaret smiled the donor smile. "Margaret Calloway. I organized this evening." "I see." Owens looked at her for exactly 1 second. "And the woman you're describing?" "Your daughter-in-law. What did you say her name was?" "Sarah. Sarah Calloway. You do know what she does, right?" Margaret laughed. Light. Dismissive. The laugh of someone who has never once been wrong in a room. "Oh, she's in the military, dear. Something administrative. I believe Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Calloway," said Brigadier General Patricia Owens, and the pleasantness had vacated her voice completely, replaced with something precise and unambiguous. "Is the JAG officer who prosecuted the largest military procurement fraud case in the last decade. She put 3 colonels in federal prison. I was her commanding officer in Kuwait. I watched her work 22 hours without stopping on a case that would have broken attorneys twice her experience. I would choose your next sentence about that woman very carefully." The retired federal judge had become very still. The hospital chief of staff was looking at Margaret with an expression that had shifted several degrees toward assessment. The city council members had stopped their own conversation entirely. Margaret's smile had not moved, but it had stopped being connected to anything real, just the practice muscle memory of 20 years of social performance, continuing on its own momentum. Because, Owens continued, very quietly, I'm also on the advisory board of the Inspector General's office that is currently reviewing a formal complaint involving false documentation submitted to Lieutenant Colonel Calloway's chain of command. A pause that lasted exactly long enough. By a civilian family member. The muscle memory smile finally gave up. Margaret looked at me. I was 8 feet away. I had not moved. I had not spoken. I had done nothing except be present. In my uniform, in the room she had built, in front of the people whose good opinion she had spent 20 years earning. I held her gaze for exactly long enough. Then I turned to Judge Hargrove. Your Honor, it's a pleasure to meet you. I believe we have a mutual colleague in the Virginia family court system. He looked at me with the expression of a man rapidly reorganizing his understanding of the evening. I believe we do, he said. Lieutenant Colonel. Behind me, I heard Margaret set her champagne glass down. I did not look back. What followed moved the way legal processes move, not dramatically, but with the gathering momentum of a verdict that is already written and working its way toward being read aloud. Welch's formal statement triggered a state bar investigation into the use of the deceased notary's credentials. The Inspector General's review of the false complaint filed to Davidson's office produced a referral to the Virginia Attorney General. The family court petition, submitted with a forged signature, was flagged by the presiding judge who, it emerged, had played golf with Judge Hargrove for 15 years. Margaret Calloway pleaded guilty to filing a false document with a Virginia family court, a Class 6 felony, and to making a false report to a federal military authority. Her attorney negotiated no prison time, which I was advised to accept as reasonable given her age and clean prior record. She received probation, community service, a permanent record that appears every time anyone searches her name. Here is what else she received. In the weeks and months that followed, the hospital board voted 7-2 to remove her from her position. The charity she had chaired for 19 years elected a new president within 31 days. Thomas Welch, her own attorney, filed a misrepresentation claim against her in civil court, which she settled quietly. The notary investigation resulted in additional charges for the individual who had supplied the credentials. The Dependency Review Committee chairwoman she had been casually cultivating for months submitted a formal recusal statement to her board and notified the court of the contact. By the time the last case was resolved, here is the accounting of what Margaret Calloway had built over 19 days of carefully organized destruction. 1 criminal felony, 1 civil settlement, 1 professional network that no longer returned her calls, 1 charity that had removed her photograph from its website, and 1 family court record that will be attached to her name in perpetuity. She had spent 7 months building a case against me. I spent 3 months dismantling it. She had forgotten one thing. I was better at this than she was. I had been doing it professionally for 18 years. At the sentencing, the judge looked at her and said, Mrs. Calloway, the record shows that you spent 7 months constructing a case against your daughter-in-law, using forged documents, a deceased notary's credentials, and false statements submitted to a federal military authority. The fact that this was motivated by family feeling does not make it legal, and it does not make it acceptable. This court does not share your assessment of what constitutes love. Margaret did not respond. She sat very straight and said nothing, which was the first time in 4 years I had seen her without a prepared answer. I thought of the iron napkins at that first dinner, the performance of warmth, the careful, sustained construction of an image that had nothing underneath it but the need to be the most important person in the room. I felt, more than anything, tired. There is one more thing I want to tell you. The night before the sentencing, I was at the kitchen table going through a box of documents, the paper trail of the last 8 months, everything organized and labeled. At the bottom of the box was a printout Rivera had included, without comment. James's email. The one he had written and never sent. Mom, you need to stop. Sarah is my wife. I went into the living room where James was sitting, Nora asleep on his chest in the lamplight. He looked up. He saw what was in my hand. He had the expression of someone who has been waiting for a consequence for a long time and has finally stopped hoping it won't come. I found it 3 weeks ago, I said. You wrote it 3 times. Yes. And you never sent it. No. I looked at him. At our daughter sleeping on his chest. At the ordinary tenderness of the scene, the lamp, the quiet house, the smallness of a sleeping baby against a parent's heartbeat. Why? I asked. Not angrily. I genuinely wanted to know. Because sending it would have made it real, he said. And I thought if I could keep it from being real long enough. He stopped. I know. That's not an answer. No, I said. It isn't. He looked up at me. What do you need from me, Sarah? Nothing, I said. That's the problem. He understood what I meant. The divorce was filed the following month. He contested nothing. He has honored every agreement, paid without complaint, shown up for Nora with a consistency that I believe costs him something, and that I genuinely respect. I think he is slowly, at considerable cost, becoming the man he should have been earlier. I am glad for him. Some apologies arrive too late to change what happened, but still land on ground that needed them. His did. Forgiveness is a practical decision as much as an emotional one. I forgave James because Nora needs her father, and because bitterness is a weight I decided not to carry. That is the complete explanation. 6 months after the sentencing, I retired from the Army. 18 years, 31 cases, 0 acquittals. I handed over my military ID on a Thursday morning at Fort Belvoir, and the officer at the desk, a young captain who looked about 26, said, "Thank you for your service, ma'am." And I said, "Thank you," and walked out into a gray November morning and sat in my car for 10 minutes before I was ready to drive. The last thing I took from my office was the JAG insignia. I put it in my jacket pocket. I've kept it there since. Now it is a Tuesday morning in April, and I am sitting on the porch of a house I'm renting in a quiet neighborhood outside Richmond, drinking coffee that I made at 6 because Nora woke at 5:47, and once she's awake, the household is awake. She is in the yard right now, 14 months old, confident in her walking and magnificently reckless about obstacles, currently very focused on a yellow leaf she found near the fence, and is carrying back to show me as if she has discovered something of significant geological importance. "Mama," she says. "Look." I look. "That's a beautiful leaf," I say. She examines it, decides she agrees, turns around and goes to find more. I drink my coffee. I look at the yard, the morning, the ordinary, extraordinary fact of this. I think about what I would tell the version of myself who sat at that first dinner table 4 years ago, watching Margaret Calloway perform warmth and choosing to believe it was real. I would tell her, trust the evidence. The evidence was there from the beginning, the ironed napkins, the absent congratulations, the comments that accumulated until they had mass and direction. I ignored it because I wanted the story to be different. I wanted a family, and I chose to see the shape of one where only the outline existed. But here is what I would also tell her. The loss was real, and the building after it is also real. Nora comes back. She has found a second leaf, slightly larger, and presents both of them as a unified offering. I take them. Perfect, I say. She agrees. She climbs into my lap, settles her back against my chest, and we sit in the April morning, her warmth, the coffee, the yellow leaves, the quiet. This is what I kept. This is what I protected. This is what no one was going to take. If there is one thing I hope you carry from this story, it is this. The people who try to take what is yours rarely announce themselves. They come with ironed napkins and gardenia perfume and the patient organized architecture of someone who has been planning for a long time. They operate in the space you leave open when you choose to keep the peace, instead of speaking the truth. And the only answer is not to become hard. It is to become precise. Know what you have. Know what it's worth. Know the rules better than the people trying to use them against you. I did. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.